In 1944, while Europe was in flames and Britain stood resilient, a young princess made a decision that shocked many. Instead of remaining in comfort, she rolled up her sleeves, donned a uniform, and learned how to fix army trucks. This was Elizabeth before the crown, before the throne. Before we dive into this remarkable story of duty, grit, and humanity, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here, we uncover hidden chapters of history and the inspiring choices that shaped lives. Share this story with someone who values courage. It's a legacy worth passing on. The Second World War was a time when nations were tested, families torn apart, and ordinary people were asked to perform extraordinary acts. Amidst the rationing, bombings, and endless uncertainty, the British royal family was not immune. During those dark years, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth famously refused to leave Buckingham Palace, even as bombs fell over London. They chose to stand with their people, and their daughter, Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, followed that very same path of solidarity. But her story went even further. She didn't just comfort children, wave from balconies, or read prepared statements. At just 18 years old, she took an unprecedented step. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, or ATS, where she trained as a mechanic and military truck driver. This was not symbolic, it was technical, demanding, and very real. It was a decision that showed not only her courage, but her deep sense of responsibility to her people. By 1944, Britain had endured years of relentless struggle. The Blitz of 1940 had devastated London, Coventry, and other cities. Bomb shelters became part of daily life. Families endured rationing of food, fuel, and clothing. Millions of men had gone off to fight, leaving women to fill factories, farms, and hospitals. The British public looked to the royal family for hope, watching every move. For many, seeing the king and queen endure the same risks gave strength. But what about the heir to the throne? Princess Elizabeth, then a young woman barely into adulthood, recognized that being future queen meant more than ceremonial duty. She understood that to lead a nation, one must share its hardships. This conviction led her to press for military service, a radical request for a princess in 1940s Britain. At first, there was hesitation. The king and queen, protective of their daughter, were reluctant to expose her to danger. The government itself was cautious. No female member of the British royal family had ever served in the armed forces. The symbolic weight of such a decision was immense. What if something happened to her? What if her presence created logistical complications? These were real concerns. Yet Elizabeth persisted. She saw the women of Britain stepping into factories, farms, and military auxiliaries, and she wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Her persistence paid off. In early 1945, the royal family agreed. Princess Elizabeth officially joined the ATS, the women's branch of the British Army. It was a quiet but revolutionary act. Upon joining, Elizabeth was not given royal privileges. She was registered as Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor, later promoted to junior commander, the equivalent of a captain. Her training was rigorous. She studied vehicle mechanics, learned how to dismantle engines, change tires, and maintain heavy vehicles. She was taught to drive military trucks, ambulances, and jeeps, skills that were essential to wartime logistics. Imagine the scene. The heir to the British throne, dressed in olive drab uniform, hands stained with oil, crouched over an engine block alongside women from every walk of life. The symbolism was powerful. She was not above them. She was one of them. Her instructors reportedly treated her like any other recruit. She attended lectures, passed written exams, and underwent practical demonstrations. There was no shortcut, no royal exception. She learned by doing. For Elizabeth personally, this was transformative. For a young woman raised in palaces and accustomed to formal education, this was a dramatic shift. Her hands, once reserved for fine gloves, now gripped wrenches and steering wheels. There's a warmth in knowing she took joy in these skills. She was seen laughing with her comrades, enjoying the independence of driving for the first time, and feeling pride in earning qualifications. For many women of that era, learning to drive or repair vehicles was their first taste of technical independence. For Elizabeth, it was no different. In later interviews, she fondly recalled her service, describing how satisfying it was to master practical work. It showed a side of her that would later define her reign: humility, discipline, and connection to everyday people. Her service was not just personal growth, it was symbolic power at its finest. For the British public, seeing their future queen working alongside ordinary women was deeply inspiring. Imagine being a mother on a factory line or a young woman in uniform, and then learning that the princess, heir to the throne, was learning the same skills you were. It closed the distance between monarchy and citizen. This was a monarchy adapted to modern times, not just ruling, but serving. It was in many ways a turning point in the relationship between the British crown and its people. The year 1944 was a turning tide. Allied troops had stormed the beaches of Normandy in June. The push toward Germany was underway, yet danger remained. V-1 and V-2 rockets struck London. Families still feared telegrams bearing bad news. In this atmosphere, Elizabeth's training in the ATS gained extra significance. She became a symbol of perseverance during the final exhausting phase of war. The knowledge that even the royal heir was putting in effort lifted morale. For her, the experience was not just about being seen. She was genuinely contributing. Every truck repaired, every engine tested, mattered to the functioning of Britain's war machine. When victory came in May 1945, Elizabeth's role continued to resonate. Famously, on VE Day, Victory in Europe, she slipped into the crowds with her sister Margaret, mingling anonymously with citizens celebrating in the streets. She later described it as one of the most memorable nights of her life. To be among her people celebrating freedom was profoundly moving. It was also possible, in part, because she had shared their war. She was not just a distant royal, she was a comrade. Though her wartime service was brief compared to professional soldiers, it shaped Elizabeth's outlook for life. Throughout her long reign, she demonstrated a sense of duty, discipline, and humility that reflected those formative months in the ATS. She valued technical knowledge and respected the armed forces deeply. Her interactions with soldiers, sailors, and airmen always carried authenticity. She had worn the uniform. She had shouldered the work. Even decades later, as queen, she would take a keen interest in military vehicles and engineering displays, often surprising experts with her practical questions. That curiosity was not ceremonial. It was rooted in lived experience. For older generations who lived through the war, Elizabeth's service cemented a bond. She was not just the queen who inherited a throne, she was the young princess who had shared their struggle. And for younger generations, her example remains powerful. It shows that leadership is not about privilege, but about service. It demonstrates that even in positions of high birth, humility and hard work matter. When we think of Queen Elizabeth II, we often remember her as the dignified monarch who served for over 70 years. But behind that crown was a young woman who once knelt over greasy engines, hands blackened, determined to contribute. Her time in the ATS during 1944 and 1945 is a reminder that true leadership begins with understanding the lives of those you lead. It is about sharing their burdens, learning their skills, and standing beside them in times of trial. That chapter, though small in duration, carried enormous weight. It shaped her identity and left a lasting mark on the monarchy itself. As we reflect on this story today, it feels more than just a historical footnote. It's a message across time. That service, no matter how humble, has value. That courage is not always on the battlefield. It can also be in the willingness to learn, to adapt, and to stand with others. For seniors who lived through those years, this story may recall familiar feelings of endurance, of finding joy in small victories, of carrying on despite uncertainty. For younger viewers, it offers perspective. Even those born into privilege can choose humility and service. Elizabeth's wartime chapter is not about engines and trucks alone. It is about the spirit of unity. A princess who wanted to be part of her people's struggle became a queen who embodied their resilience for the rest of her life. And so, as we honor her memory and her reign, let us not forget that young mechanic in uniform who showed the world that leadership is forged in service.